Not all hostility announces itself loudly. Some of it hides behind smiles, familiarity, and long-shared history. The most unsettling form of hatred is not open conflict, but silent resistance, an emotional withdrawal that disguises itself as normalcy. Often, the person who secretly resents you is not a stranger, but someone close enough to observe your growth, your changes, and your becoming. When someone harbors hidden animosity, they rarely confront you directly. Instead, their behavior becomes subtly distorted. Their support feels conditional, their encouragement sounds rehearsed, and their presence, once nourishing, begins to drain you. This is because unacknowledged resentment does not disappear. It turns inward and leaks out through indirect actions. One sign appears in moments of your success. When you share progress, their reaction lacks warmth. They may minimize your achievement, change the subject, or respond with faint praise that carries no emotional weight. This response is not accidental. Growth in another often triggers unresolved insecurity in those who have not confronted their own stagnation. Another sign is passive obstruction. They do not openly oppose you, but somehow plans fall apart, momentum slows, or clarity dissolves after interactions with them. This is not sabotage in the dramatic sense, but in the psychological one, where negativity is disguised as concern, advice, or realism. What they call honesty quietly erodes your confidence. There is also a shift in emotional availability. Conversations become shallow. Empathy fades. Your struggles are met with impatience, or worse, indifference. The bond remains on the surface, but the depth has vanished. This withdrawal is often unconscious. They may not even admit their resentment to themselves, but the psyche reveals what the mouth conceals. At the core of this dynamic is projection. What they dislike in you is often what they cannot accept within themselves. Your courage exposes their fear. Your authenticity threatens their masks. Rather than integrate these shadowed parts, they push the discomfort outward, onto you, recognizing this is not an invitation to hatred in return, it is an invitation to clarity. Awareness allows you to stop seeking validation from places that cannot provide it. It teaches you to protect your inner life, not through confrontation, but through discernment. Not everyone who walks beside you is meant to walk with you forever. Some are companions of a previous self, and when you outgrow that self, resistance appears. The task is not to fix their resentment, but to continue your individuation without apology itself through open conflict or obvious hostility. Instead, it often blends seamlessly into everyday interactions, wearing the mask of normal behavior. This is what makes it so difficult to recognize. When resentment remains unspoken, it does not disappear, it simply learns how to hide. It adapts to social expectations, adopts polite language, and follows familiar routines, all while quietly shaping attitudes and responses beneath the surface. Because everything appears ordinary, the emotional tension it creates is frequently dismissed as misunderstanding, mood changes, or stress, rather than being seen for what it truly is. In close relationships, hidden resentment can persist for years without ever being named. The person experiencing it may not even be fully aware of its presence. It develops gradually, often rooted in unexpressed disappointment, jealousy, or feelings of being overshadowed. Rather than confronting these emotions directly, the individual suppresses them in order to maintain harmony or avoid vulnerability. Outwardly, they continue to act supportive, friendly, or neutral. Inwardly, however, a quiet resistance begins to form, influencing how they perceive and respond to the other person. This kind of resentment subtly alters communication. Words remain polite, but the warmth behind them fades. Compliment. Lose sincerity. Encouragement feels mechanical, and conversations lack genuine engagement. There is often a sense that something is missing, though nothing obvious is wrong. Because no single action appears hostile, the discomfort is easy to rationalize away. Yet the cumulative effect of these small emotional absences can be deeply unsettling, creating confusion and self-doubt in the person on the receiving end. Hidden resentment also reveals itself through inconsistency. Support may appear selectively, offered when it costs little but withdrawn when it truly matters. The person may agree outwardly while inwardly resisting, leading to delays, forgotten commitments, or vague responses. These behaviors are rarely aggressive enough to be confronted, but they quietly undermine trust. Over time, the relationship begins to feel unbalanced, as though effort flows in only one direction. Another way hidden resentment disguises itself is through subtle judgment. Advice may be given under the guise of concern, yet it carries an undertone of criticism. Questions feel less like curiosity and more like quiet evaluation. Even humor can become a vehicle for resentment, with small remarks that seem harmless but leave a lingering sense of discomfort. Because these moments are framed as normal interaction, they are often excused or ignored. At its core, hidden resentment thrives on avoidance. It allows a person to maintain an image of decency while protecting themselves from confronting painful truths. However, what is avoided internally does not remain contained. It shapes behavior, influences tone, and creates emotional distance. Recognizing this pattern requires attention not to dramatic actions, but to subtle shifts in energy, presence, and sincerity. Normal behavior, when infused with unresolved resentment, loses its authenticity, becoming a quiet signal of an inner conflict that has yet to be acknowledged. A lack of genuine support during your success is one of the most revealing signs of hidden inner conflict in a relationship. Success acts like a mirror. It reflects not only your growth, effort, and alignment, but also the unresolved feelings of those who stand close enough to witness it. When someone truly supports you, your progress feels shared, celebrated, and encouraged without hesitation. When that support is absent, the silence surrounding your achievements speaks louder than any words. Often this lack of support does not appear as outright negativity. Instead, it manifests as emotional flatness. Your accomplishments are acknowledged, but without enthusiasm. The response feels obligatory rather than heartfelt, as if the words are spoken out of social necessity rather than genuine joy. The moment that should strengthen connection instead creates distance, leaving you with an uneasy sense that your growth is not entirely welcome. In some cases, the reaction shifts from neutrality to subtle minimization. Achievements are reframed as luck, timing, or coincidence. The effort behind them is overlooked, and the significance is quietly reduced. This does not happen accidentally. When someone struggles with their own unfulfilled potential, another person's success can activate deep feelings of inadequacy or comparison. Rather than confront these feelings, they unconsciously diminish what threatens their sense of self. Another common pattern is redirection. Instead of engaging with your success, the conversation moves quickly to their own problems, opinions, or experiences. This shift may appear harmless, but it reveals an inability to sit with your moment of expansion. Your growth interrupts the emotional equilibrium they rely on, and redirecting attention becomes a way to restore internal balance without acknowledging discomfort. There are also instances where concern disguises itself as support. Advice is offered immediately, even when it is not needed. Warnings replace encouragement. Potential risks are emphasized more than progress. While this may sound practical on the surface, its underlying tone often lacks faith in your capacity. True support empowers. False support subtly questions your legitimacy, planting seeds of doubt where confidence should be taking root. Over time, repeated experiences of unsupported success can shape your inner world. You may hesitate to share good news, downplay your achievements, or seek validation elsewhere. This self-silencing is not a flaw. It is a natural response to an environment that does not fully receive your growth, yet it is also a quiet signal that the relational dynamic has shifted. Success changes relationships because it changes perception. It alters roles, challenges identities, and exposes emotional truths that were easier to ignore when everything felt equal. When genuine support is missing, it often reveals not malice, but unresolved inner tension. Recognizing this allows you to stop measuring your worth through the reactions of others and begin honoring your progress without apology or external permission. Passive obstruction and concern-based negativity are among the most difficult relational patterns to recognize because they rarely appear hostile on the surface. They often present themselves as care, realism, or protective guidance. The language sounds reasonable, even thoughtful, yet beneath this appearance lies a subtle resistance that interferes with momentum, clarity, and confidence. Unlike open opposition, this form of obstruction works quietly, shaping outcomes without ever taking responsibility for the effect it creates. Passive obstruction does not say no directly. Instead, it delays, complicates, and softens urgency until progress loses its force. Plans are met with hesitation rather than refusal. Support is offered in theory but withheld in action. There is always a reason something cannot move forward yet, a detail that needs more consideration, or a concern that must be addressed first. Over time, this constant slowing creates stagnation, leaving you unsure whether the resistance comes from external circumstances or the relational dynamic itself. Concern-based negativity makes this pattern especially confusing. Advice is framed as care for your well-being, your future, or your safety. Doubts are presented as wisdom. Warnings replace encouragement. While genuine concern empowers growth and trusts resilience, this version subtly undermines it. It focuses excessively on what could go wrong, rarely acknowledging what is already working. The emotional message beneath the words is not belief, but doubt. This form of negativity often emerges when someone feels threatened by change. Your movement forward disrupts the emotional balance they are accustomed to. Rather than confront their fear, insecurity, or envy, they redirect those feelings outward through cautionary language. By emphasizing risks, they protect themselves from having to examine their own discomfort. The concern sounds selfless, but its impact is restrictive. Over time, exposure to passive obstruction reshapes your internal dialogue. You may begin to second-guess decisions that once felt clear. Confidence softens into hesitation. The voice of doubt starts to sound like your own, even though it was originally introduced from outside. This is how subtle resistance becomes powerful. It does not control you directly. It trains you to control yourself. Another defining feature of passive obstruction is deniability. When questioned, the person can sincerely claim they only wanted what was best for you. Because their behavior is not overtly negative, it becomes difficult to address without appearing ungrateful or defensive. This leaves you carrying the emotional burden alone, unsure whether your sense of being held back is valid. Recognizing this pattern requires attention to outcomes rather than intentions. Genuine support may challenge you, but it ultimately strengthens clarity and movement. Passive obstruction, no mat. How kindly framed, consistently weakens momentum. Awareness restores choice. Once you see the pattern, you are no longer required to internalize hesitation that does not originate from your own intuition. Emotional withdrawal and the loss of empathy rarely happen suddenly. They unfold gradually, almost imperceptibly, until the absence of connection becomes a quiet but persistent presence. At first, the change is easy to dismiss. People grow tired, distracted, or preoccupied, and closeness naturally fluctuates. Yet when withdrawal becomes a pattern rather than a phase, it signals an internal distancing that words often fail to reveal. The relationship continues in form, but something essential has receded beneath the surface. When empathy fades, responses become thinner. Where there was once curiosity, there is now impatience. Where there was understanding, there is neutrality or silence. Emotional expressions are met with minimal acknowledgement, as though your inner world has become an inconvenience rather than something worthy of care. This shift is especially painful because it is not dramatic. There is no argument to point to, no clear betrayal to name, only the steady erosion of emotional presence. Emotional withdrawal often serves as a defense. When someone feels overwhelmed by unresolved feelings such as resentment, insecurity, or guilt, disengagement becomes a way to protect themselves. By pulling back emotionally, they avoid confronting discomfort within. However, this withdrawal does not remain contained. It alters the relational atmosphere, creating a sense of emotional loneliness even in physical closeness. You may find yourself speaking more while being heard less, sharing more while receiving less in return. The loss of empathy can also appear as emotional misalignment. Your struggles are no longer met with compassion but with solutions, dismissal, or comparison. Instead of being witnessed, you are evaluated. Instead of being supported, you are corrected. These responses may seem practical, yet they lack the emotional attunement that signals genuine care. Over time, this absence teaches you to withhold your vulnerability, sensing intuitively that it will not be met with understanding. This pattern often creates self-doubt. When empathy disappears quietly, the person experiencing it may question their own needs. They may wonder if they are asking for too much, being too sensitive, or misinterpreting signals. The absence of emotional feedback blurs perception, making it difficult to trust one's own experience. This internal confusion is not a weakness, it is a natural response to emotional inconsistency. Emotional withdrawal also reshapes the energy of connection. Conversations feel transactional rather than alive. Shared moments lose depth. Even silence feels different, heavy rather than comfortable. The bond persists in structure, but its emotional substance thins. What once felt reciprocal begins to feel one-sided, requiring increasing effort to maintain. Recognizing emotional withdrawal and loss of empathy requires attention to patterns rather than isolated moments. Everyone has limits, but consistent absence of emotional presence reflects an inner disengagement that has not been spoken. Awareness of this dynamic is not about assigning blame. It is about honoring the truth of what is felt and acknowledging when connection has shifted in ways that words alone cannot repair. Projection is one of the mind's most subtle defenses, operating quietly beneath awareness while shaping how people perceive and relate to others. When individuals encounter traits in someone else that they have not accepted or developed within themselves, discomfort arises. Rather than turning inward to confront this tension, the psyche often redirects it outward. In this way, unresolved inner conflict transforms into resentment, and another person becomes the symbolic carrier of what remains unintegrated within. This process, Rorel, feels deliberate. The person experiencing projection may sincerely believe their reactions are justified, even rational. They may label the other as arrogant, reckless, naive, or overly confident without recognizing that these judgments are emotionally charged. What gives projection its intensity is not the trait itself, but the internal struggle it represents. The trait in the other exposes a neglected potential, a denied desire, or a feared weakness within the observer. Resentment grows when this inner conflict remains unresolved. Seeing someone embody qualities you suppress, such as confidence, authenticity, ambition, or emotional freedom, can feel threatening. It challenges the internal narrative you have built to survive, adapt, or belong. Instead of questioning that narrative, the mind protects it by externalizing discomfort. The other person becomes the problem, and their traits become reasons for irritation rather than invitations to self-reflection. Projection also distorts perception. Neutral actions are interpreted negatively. Success is seen as showing off. Boundaries are viewed as selfishness. Calmness is mistaken for coldness. These interpretations are not grounded in objective reality, but in the emotional charge of what the trait represents internally. The resentment feels personal, yet its roots lie elsewhere. This dynamic often appears in close relationships because proximity intensifies reflection. The closer someone is, the more clearly their traits mirror unresolved aspects of your own psyche. This is why resentment can exist alongside familiarity or even affection. The person is not hated for who they are, but for what they awaken internally. Because this awareness is uncomfortable, it remains largely unconscious. For the one being projected upon, the experience can be confusing. The resentment feels disproportionate or unearned. Support turns inconsistent. Appreciation becomes scarce. Subtle criticism replaces openness. Without understanding projection, it is easy to internalize this treatment, believing there is something inherently wrong with you. In reality, you are often standing in for an internal conflict that is not yours to resolve. Projection persists until awareness interrupts it. Integration requires acknowledging disowned traits and accepting them as part of the self. Without this process, resentment continues to search for external targets. Recognizing projection does not require confrontation or defense. It requires clarity. When you understand that another's resentment may reflect their unintegrated inner world, you regain emotional sovereignty. You no longer carry what was never yours, and you are free to remain aligned with your own development without shrinking to accommodate another's unresolved shadow. Awareness and boundaries are often misunderstood as passive responses, especially in situations where tension, resentment, or emotional harm is present. Many believe that healing or strength requires confrontation, direct explanation, or emotional exposure. Yet in psychologically complex dynamics, confrontation can intensify defensiveness rather than create understanding. Awareness, by contrast, brings clarity without force. It allows you to see a situation as it is, not as you wish it to be, and to respond with intention rather than reaction. Awareness begins with observation. It means noticing patterns instead of fixating on isolated incidents. Emotional shifts, subtle behaviors, and repeated inconsistencies reveal more than direct statements ever could. When you cultivate awareness, you stop explaining away discomfort and start trusting the information your experience provides. This does not mean assigning blame or assuming malice. It means accepting what is present without distortion or denial. From awareness emerges the need for boundaries. Boundaries are not punishments or ultimatums, they are expressions of self-respect. They define what you will allow access to and what you will not. When emotional energy is repeatedly drained, boundaries protect rather than isolate. They regulate closeness in a way that preserves inner stability. Unlike confrontation, which seeks change in the other, boundaries focus on responsibility for the self. Confrontation often assumes that clarity will lead to transformation. In reality, people can only meet you at the level of awareness they possess. When someone is acting from denial, projection, or unacknowledged resentment, confrontation may only provoke justification or withdrawal. Awareness recognizes this limitation. It does not attempt to force insight where none is possible. Instead, it adjusts behavior accordingly. Boundaries may appear subtle from the outside. They can involve sharing less personal information, limiting emotional exposure, or disengaging from cycles that consistently lead to confusion or harm. These actions are not acts of avoidance, they are acts of discernment. They allow you to remain present without being entangled in dynamics that undermine your clarity or self-worth. Another strength of boundaries is that they remove the need for constant explanation. When you are aware of what no longer serves you, your actions speak more clearly than words. You stop over-justifying your choices or seeking validation for protecting yourself. This quiet consistency communicates far more than emotional confrontation ever could. Awareness and boundaries also prevent the internalization of another person's unresolved struggles. When you understand that not all behavior is a reflection of your worth, you stop absorbing emotional residue that does not belong to you. This creates psychological space for growth, stability, and self-alignment. Choosing awareness and boundaries is not about winning or proving a point. It is about preserving your inner coherence. By responding with clarity rather than conflict, you maintain integrity without escalating tension. This approach honors both your inner life and the reality of the situation, allowing you to move forward grounded, intact, and emotionally sovereign. And so, the deeper truth is this: not every fracture in connection is meant to be repaired through words. Some truths reveal themselves not through confrontation, but through quiet recognition. When you learn to see clearly, you no longer need to explain yourself to those who cannot meet you with the same awareness. Growth does not require permission, and clarity does not require agreement. Let what you notice guide you more than what you hope for. Protect your inner life with discernment, not defensiveness. As you continue to evolve, some relationships will naturally loosen their hold, not as a failure but as a confirmation that you are no longer meant to remain where your becoming is resisted. Walk forward without resentment, without apology, and without the need to be understood. The right connections will not question your light, they will recognize it.